Hello, and welcome back to another presentation about the Song of the Fae. The Song of the Fae is a game by 2PM Studios, which is made up of myself, Ben, and my development partner, Ricky. You can find out more about it on our website or by following me on Twitter, but in case you don't want to do any of those things, here's a little clip of the game now. It's a turn-based tactics game. It's got chess-like elements. You can only move one piece per turn, and each unit has a special function in the game, which you will discover by using it. So, as I said, the game is called The Song of the Fae. You play as a bard who can charm others to do their bidding. That's how you get new units. And it's a randomly generated turn-based tactics game inspired by chess. So we're going to zoom in on one of those dot points today, the randomly generated dot point. What do I mean by that? So we're going to talk about procedural generation, and I've put quotation marks around this to stop people on the internet getting angry about me because it might not be that procedural in their mind. So it means many things to many people, but in our game, we have an episodic game, and each of those episodes you play through is made up of a series of encounters. And by an encounter, I mean something like this room you saw before, where I was moving around, clicking units, fighting a set collection of enemies. The problem is, if you have to repeat those encounters, you're going to become very bored. So, how do we make sure there's lots of interesting encounters for the players to explore? This talk is going to focus on specifically the encounter generation. Episodes also have random and procedural elements to them, but that will be a different talk because I'm still working out how that actually works. I have no idea how we're going to solve those problems yet. So, as I said, boredom. This is a tactics game, and our main challenge is our challenge as developers is to challenge the player to strategize. So we can't be giving them the same rooms, the same encounters over and over again, and we need lots of rooms to combat that problem. But I am in fact only one human, and I've put a sad face here because there are many things I would do if there were more than just me. You might be asking, is Ricky also not a human? Well, yeah, but he is also only one human, and two humans can still only do a finite amount of work. So, fortunately, computers can help with this problem. They can widen the lens and let us be less specific. We don't need to control literally everything about how every level is generated, right? We actually just want to say, in this room, I think we need a couple of enemies. It needs to be pretty hard. The player is going to be able to bring in 2 or 3 of their own units, and we'll go from there. And we can let the computer do this for us by laying down those ideas as constraints and allowing the computer to solve them. So this system is built up using layers of simple constraints. That's what I'm going to emphasize. Here is an example of a level file from the Song of the Fae. It's an ASCII grid here. Each character has a particular meaning in the file, and we'll walk through what each character means. Don't worry if it looks a bit confusing. It's actually not that confusing. Quick aside here, I got this idea from Spelunky. I can't remember where on earth I read it originally, but in one of the breakdowns I've read of how Spelunky's level generation works, Derek talks about using text files to represent chunks of the level, so you can easily lay down this like base structure without being really specific about what else goes in there, and the game can combine those together, enrich them, and change parts of it. And that's always stayed with me as being a really clever approach to procedural generation, because of course Spelunky is awesome. If you haven't heard about how the level generation works in Spelunky, I will link the Game Maker's Toolkit video going through how Spelunky 1's level generation works down below in the description. So, part 1. When we start with a room, we have the board. Here, you can see the board is a 6x6 isometric grid floating in space with nothing of interest on it. And this looks about how you might guess if you saw that file before. It's all underscores everywhere. So every slot is an open space. That's what this means, right? Every single underscore represents an open slot on the board that anything could move into. Now, so the board is just the play area. We actually want to create what's called a room in game terminology, well, in our game's terminology here, which is something that contains enemies. You can get in and out of it. You can fight an encounter in it. So, yes, I did have to put this in as soon as I saw that I'd called this slide the room. We're going to move past it. So here, I've highlighted the fact that if you were being really astute in the previous slide, you will have seen that it's a 6x6 grid I had on the right, but on the left there were 8 rows, and there are in fact 8 columns as well. You just can't see them because there's no separation between the underscores. And that's what I've highlighted here. There's like an imaginary border around the map here, and while that doesn't make sense in an empty room like this, it will make sense in a second as I walk through some other pieces we lay down on top of this. So, if I instead go ahead and put some hashes in here, hashes are what we use to describe obstacles in the level format. So each of these red squares on the board corresponds to one of those hashes. Once again, noting the border of underscores around the outside explains why those are indented, one to the right and one down from the top left corner. And these tiles, nothing can move into. Nothing can stand on them, nothing can move through them, over them, etc. They are blocked regions. And this is how we represent all obstacles in the game. Here is starting to become a bit more like what you'd expect one of our normal rooms to have as a base. There's this ring of obstacles around the outside, and that means you can't get out of the room. Kind of an obvious thing. It just means that we can reuse a lot of our raycasting and detection logic between normal moves and moving in and out of the map by modeling it this way. By putting the border there, you just use the same rules for everything. And in fact, this is really useful when we add the next symbol to our arsenal. The capital O is a door or an opening. And you can see I put 4 of them in the text file on the left, and on the right, 4 doors have appeared, and the collision map has gaps in it now where you can leave the room. So these obstacles in this border actually are vital to make doors work properly, and I've been really happy with how this system has worked so far. One second. We've now got what you might call a room, but it's very boring. It doesn't look like anything. It's a bunch of doors floating in space. I don't know if anyone will want to play this game just yet. So how can we make this game look a little more interesting? Well, for that, we need maps. And so this is a little video of me working on a map in Blender. We use the Sprytile plugin for Blender, which lets you make maps this way out of, maps, makes you make anything this way out of a tile set. You can lay down individual tiles, paint over them, move the mesh around afterwards. It's very powerful, but it allows me to keep using my tiny 2D game brain while working on 3D modeling problems, which is something I'm not an expert at. When we take this model out of Blender, we export it. We then get it into Unity, and I put it into a prefab. There's nothing special here. This is literally just the mesh inside a prefab that I'm showing you. Then on top of that, I'll add a bunch of decorations. So here, there's some trees, some mushrooms, some little some plants, and there's a butterfly in the back there, I think. These things at runtime face the camera, so they give it a nice like billboarding effect. It looks a bit messed up here because it's in the editor. And then to actually use this in the game, we had to bring all this stuff together, right? We have to take that model I just made, the text file I've been describing, and a bit more information, as you can see on this slide. So we can specify different tags for a room. We can say the difficulty, the room type, the terrain, and then the model, which is the model we just made, the dimensions, the room's origin, and the forest file there is the text file we created earlier. So this is what makes up a room in the game. And outside of what Pit decides when rooms are selected, this is like the core of what defines a given encounter is the room definition. So now that we've actually gone through how the shape of the room, the art, it gets into the game, how it's all linked up, how do we put things in the room and actually play the game? If you look on the left here, you'll see that there are a few new letters on the screen. There's an E, an S, and a P that have appeared in the middle of the level there. If you're good at spatial mapping, you've probably already worked out how all this works, but we're going to step through them one by one. P is for the player, the little blue guy with the silly hat there. He appears wherever you put that P in the level, and that matters because it significantly changes the way you'll interact with the rest of the room based on where you start, but that's it. It's just wherever you put that P down, that's where the player spawns. The S is for soldier or swordsman. Honestly, we might change the letters. We've been playing around with it. These are just the things we had early on because they were recognizable. And these define where your units will spawn. Now, you'll notice these units are white in the picture over there. I hesitated when I said your units. These have spawned neutral units in this case, which is what happens when you don't have any units in your army currently. We'll get into that in a second, but how do we decide what units we want to spawn in these spots is the question I want to focus on right now. There are many types of units in the game. They have random variation between them. It's not a straightforward question to answer. So we came up with this concept called spawn weightings, which is literally a bunch of weighted sliders saying for each type of unit, how likely relatively is this unit to spawn compared to the others. And this means we have a little black box effectively that I can say, yeah, roll the dice, give me a unit, and just tell me what it is I'm supposed to spawn, and then we just get that. And these are nicely decoupled systems, they don't know anything about each other, easy to work with. But if we've already come to the room with units in our army from a previous encounter, then it doesn't work quite the same way. So you'll see on the left, we've got that place your units pop up where you can choose what units you're going to bring into this encounter. There's 2 units in that box, and on the map you'll see instead of the previous 3 units that were here, we now only have the 1, and the 2 in the box make up that count 3. So these S's work as places that you can spawn your army units into. This is something that allows the game to be quite balanced at the moment. We're still playing with exactly when you're going to get neutral units versus not get them, because at the moment if I had 3 units, no neutral units would have spawned, and it's exciting to get new units, so we're still playing around with this stuff. But anyway, if you have units in your army, then there's no random selection of units that happens here. You get to pick the units from your army you'd like to use, and that adds a level of strategy to the game about picking the right units for the right encounters, etc. E's are for enemies. It's like a child's book. Children's book, that's the normal way you'd say that. In this case, these enemies are both imps, but these are also randomly selected from the spawn weightings. There are different ones defined for enemies like this. You can see skeletons are more likely, everything else is more or less balanced at the moment. That will change over time as well. And you can see, based on just the unit variation, these are the first 4 times that I ran this encounter to get some screenshots for the presentation, and they're all different. They're all reasonably different. All these units play differently, all these enemies present different challenges, and this is what we want. The player will think, oh, I recognize this room when they spawn in, but their strategy is not something that they can just use pre-canned from the previous time they saw this encounter. Right, so that's pretty much how the room generation works today. What's next on the roadmap? We want to look into generating odd dimension rooms, like 7x7 rooms. This isn't something I highlighted in the presentation, but currently rooms must be 6x6, 8x8, 10x10, etc. That's actually just because it's easier to find the middle of a board when there's a border between cells there instead of a cell there. You'll know what I mean if you've ever done pixel art on an odd-sized canvas versus an even-sized canvas. Certain drawing problems are worse. We also want to look into, if you give me about the size of the room you want and the base shape of that room, is it going to be an L-shaped room, an X-shaped room, just a square, and like various different kinds of layout. Can we generate the text file itself? Can we come up with that layout dynamically? The big question for this one to me is how to do the art in a way that looks good, because I really like how our game looks and I would rather it kept looking better instead of looking any worse to make the procedural generation better. So we're basically looking for ways to make this even more powerful fundamentally and do less manual authoring. And we also wanted to point this same effort towards generating entire episodes, which are about 20 minutes of gameplay, using the same kind of ideas. Not the same like layout of using text files, obviously, but this constraint-based, sketch the outline and let the game fill in the actual contents sort of approach to things. I've talked about this in my previous presentation. We like to think of discovering the game out of the space of possibility. So we don't want to have to manually put down every single thing that can happen. The interaction of the systems in the game is what makes it feel magical, for lack of a better word. I want to quickly finish on this inherent push-pull relationship that I personally see in procedurally generated games. On the one hand, you've got diverse and procedurally generated content. It's very entertaining, it's interesting, we can forget an infinite amount of it, theoretically. We can explore it to our heart's content, but it can feel a bit empty, and I'm not sure if you know what I mean, but there are certain games, certain roguelikes and roguelites especially, I play where the procedural generation has too much control and it's really just randomly putting things on the screen and it feels incoherent. It's not consistent, it doesn't feel like it has a personality. And that's what the pull on the other side of this is. I use the yin-yang symbol, by the way, because it is something I like the look of. I like the symbology of it. It fits here. On the right-hand side, we've got personality and handcrafted. And what I'm actually implying here, which isn't strictly true, is that the more procedurally generated your game is, the less personality it has. You could certainly pick very personality-filled ways of doing procedural generation, and you'd combat that problem. That's something we're actually trying to do here, right? We're not doing the same procedural generation that everyone else uses, random cave generators, Perlin noise, those sort of things. But without some element of handcrafted design in a given level or a given encounter, the game's just not going to feel like people made it. It's going to feel like a computer is making it. And I think it's important that we retain that personal connection between the developer and the player, even if we're leveraging these tools. So we're not planning on going whole hog, full procedural generation. It will always be partially authored, partially generated. I just want you to understand that, there is a balance here that we're trying to strike properly. And so that's it. It does it for this one. If you have any feedback, any questions, you just want to tell me you liked what you saw, that'd be awesome. Please do. You can hit me up on Twitter. You can join our Discord for the game. You can follow the game at the website, 2pm.studio/Song of The Fae, SoTF, if you prefer. And yeah, wishlist the game on Steam, follow it on itch, any of the channels. I love it all. Thanks. See you next time.